Last year, I had the great privilege of spending 8 months in Australia, finishing up my Jesuit formation before I take final vows. And while working in rural South Australia with folks who mostly live on ranches and farms, I was working in a parish at one point and teaching catechism. And there was a fifth grader who came up to me and was telling me that Jesus must have ridden and owned horses. And I scratched my head and I thought to myself, I wonder where he gets this idea. Maybe it's from growing up on a ranch. He just expects everybody rides and owns horses. But he said, no, Father David, I'm really sure about this. Who else would he be talking to when he says, whoa? Jesus does say whoa several times in this gospel. Woe to you who are rich. Woe to you who are well-fed. Woe to you who are popular. And we wonder what exactly he's getting at. Is Jesus condemning what we would call the so-called good life? If he is, what's he recommending in its place? If I'm not mistaken, as I said at the beginning of Mass, the Beatitudes are Jesus's very challenging teachings about the path to true spiritual happiness. But they are challenging, and what they challenge are the way that the world teaches us to be happy. Now, if I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, the world basically teaches that the path to happiness are seeking wealth, riches, celebrity or fame, and privilege and prestige. Do I have a basic agreement out there that that's basically what the world teaches us to be happy? Let me see a show of hands if you agree. That's what the world basically teaches. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is, Jesus is not really the only one who sees this as a fairly mistaken way of proceeding. In fact, no matter how popular and attractive these three very popular paths are to trying to approach happiness in the world, there's a lot of data to suggest that they just don't work. Let's take riches, for example. When studies are done almost on an annual basis to try to determine whether people who have money are more happy than those who have less middle class, for instance, incomes, there is almost no difference in the amount of their happiness. In fact, there seems to be this proportional level of anxiety and stress that comes with more wealth. You have more wealth, you're more worried about taking care of it. Your investments, your portfolios. The general drive is to getting more, and that means that there's a kind of restless discontent with what we have. You may have heard the same studies, and I'm not looking at anybody out there who buys lottery tickets, okay? Not looking. But studies show that people who win lotteries a year later are less happy than they were before they won. There's all kinds of complications that come into our lives with more than we need. So I'm just proposing that riches may not be the best path to happiness. Let's look at celebrity for a second. You know, we've got a lot of people clamoring to get on to reality shows. We've got this couple that snuck into the White House, you know. We've got all these folks who think that it's going to be a quick path to fame and fortune. But when we actually look at the lives of the famous, of the celebrities out there, again, I'm not looking at anybody in particular or naming any names, but it doesn't seem like the best way to go. Every gesture, every fad of those in the public eye is scrutinized, is ridiculed, is judged. Imagine living with that constant scrutiny in your life. Every step you take is going to be sort of looked at by others. And it raises questions. If so much of celebrity is about maintaining external appearances, then where is the integrity? You know, there's that idea that sometimes when we're trying to please everyone, we fail to even understand who we are anymore. And, okay, one more. Let's look at privilege. How many of you, raise your hands, saw the movie Up in the Air with George Clooney? It was just out? Okay, just a few. It's a pretty good movie, I must say. The premise is there's this guy, George Clooney, who's a corporate jet setter. And he basically lives for the perks that come with being a very frequent flyer. He lives without connections, commitments, relationships, and in his view, that way of traveling light is the way to be happy. But when he does realize how empty that is, it's almost too late. There's a way in which living for privilege leads us to feel entitled to what we get. And my friends, if we feel entitled to everything we receive, there's no space for gratitude in our lives. And if we have no gratitude, we have no joy. So, I'm going to propose we look at Jesus' way for a moment. Jesus' way is, as I said, it's challenging, and it seems a little bleak. He talks about poverty. He talks about the importance of an integrity of life, no matter what others think, and humility. When Jesus is talking about poverty, he's not talking about destitution. He's not trying to celebrate the kind of poverty we see people living on street corners here in Syracuse or in Haiti or in developing nations around the world. What Jesus is advocating is an embrace of simplicity, the capacity to enjoy the simple things in life. A home-cooked meal, time with family and friends, the beauty of nature, the simple things in life that the wealthy and the rich fail to understand as valuable. In fact, I'm willing to say that Jesus had a very deep appreciation for that simple life and lived with great joyfulness, even though he himself had little. There's a sense in which there's a freedom from concern about possessions, and when our lives are more about giving to others than getting, you and I know the satisfaction of that. We know the joy on Christmas of seeing the eyes and faces of people we've given gifts to, that there's something satisfying about that cannot be replaced by what we get ourselves. Integrity. Jesus says it's not about celebrity. It's not about being popular. In fact, we should be wary when we're popular because it raises a question. Do we have the freedom, the integrity to speak up the truth when necessary, to challenge injustice? Do we have the integrity to be truth tellers and to denounce exploitation? The question that Jesus raises for us is a challenging one. If we are seeking to please everyone, we have to ask ourselves, who are we really underneath? And finally, humility. I must say, Syracuse basketball team might have gotten a little bit of humility today, losing to, but there's a value here, there's a virtue. Humility comes from the same word as humor. So it suggests that part of humility is having a sense of humor about ourselves, not taking ourselves too seriously. It comes from the same word as humus, the rich earth. It says something about us having our feet on the ground. And I think it's more than that. Humility is something about recognizing that our dignity, our sense of worth, does not come from what people think of us. It doesn't come from possessions. It doesn't come from privilege. It is founded on the fact that you and I are beloved sons and daughters of our God, just as Jesus is. That's where our dignity and our humility come from. And in humility, everything we receive in our lives is cause for gratitude, and gratitude fills us with generosity, and generosity fills us with joy. The Christian path is not an easy one, and the way Jesus is teaching us to happiness is not popular with the world. It is not going to be sold on reality TV shows. But when we check in with ourselves, why do we live this way? I can only speak for myself, but maybe it resonates with you. I live this way because it's good and wholesome for my soul. I believe it's good for the people out there whose lives I touch in near and far ways. And I believe it's very much about the future, that the future depends on us choosing this path to happiness rather than wealth and celebrity and privilege, which means that a very small number of people will ever share in that, and much more of the world will be excluded. As my little fifth grader from Australia would say, "What do you think about that, mate?"